just going back sort of the beginnings of sort of tobacco really. So it's believed that tobacco was sort of reintroduced by Sir Walter Raleigh, as far as we know. Some people may dispute that. During the court of Elizabeth I. During the 1600s, the trade between the Americas and the UK was starting to kick off a lot more, and tobacco became a big part of that trade. So Kendal was already, where we're based in Kendal, it was already, and it has always been, a small mill town, but more focused on textiles. Quite a lot of sheep roaming around. It was a lot of wool. Our coat of arms is to do with wool and stuff like this. But we also had seaports, which were quite handy. And I did just chucked up last night just a quick Google map. So my pointer. Here we go. We're obviously slightly further south down here. It's kind of gone off the screen. But the seaports that were bringing tobacco in from America over that way were sort of Whitehaven, Workington, around here. So at the time, leaf was sort of coming sort of through those ports and going up to where most stuff was produced in Glasgow, and back then it was more snuff. Okay, so Kendal was in quite a good place to sort of intercept really. I'm just going to grab my mouse back. But snuff in the 1600s was, it was seen to have medicinal purposes as opposed to sort of a pleasure thing, and was often prescribed by doctors for a range of ailments. And it was doctors who first started grinding snuff sort of for sale to the general public, but more for sort of medicinal reasons really. And it wasn't until the 1700s when an English admiral intercepted a Spanish treasure fleet carrying thousands of barrels of high quality snuff that it became more of a sort of commercially available thing. Because I think before then it was either you sort of your upper classes and medical sort of things. So when the sailors came back from that particular trip, they had their bounty to sell, and it became a bit more available. So then in 1790, the first sort of character of our story sort of comes into the history books. And this gentleman was local to Kendal, but he decided to go up to Glasgow to learn how to produce snuff, because that's where most of it was happening. A few years later, he came back down to Kendal with a load of equipment that he bought. His name was Thomas Harrison, and he set up a mill just in a little hamlet called Mealbank. It's actually really close to where our current factory is. And he set up, we believe, near that, in there. So Thomas found his snuff company with a local chemist, kind of made sense at the time. And Thomas's son continued the business until a more familiar character in our story came around. Around 1830, Thomas Harrison and his son purchased 27 Lowther Street, which is our old factory building that we still own. Okay, so from very early start. But then what sort of happened to that building then over the subsequent years, it was sort of, we've still got it, but it was used for sort of different things, different people occupying it. And one of the daughters of Thomas's son, Jane, eloped to Gretna Green, as was the thing to do then, to get married, and she married a local Kendal gentleman called Samuel Gowith. So he's the first guy we really know of, or you guys will have heard of. The couple moved into the upper floors of 27 Lowther Street, where they lived, and they produced tobacco underneath. The factory, our old factory, sort of became fully into use. That couple went on to have 6 children, but only 3 of them, because I think there was three boys and 3 girls, and back then girls weren't allowed to inherit companies or something. So the three children: Samuel Gowith II, John Edward, and William Henry. Samuel Gowith II over there. The 2 older brothers, Samuel and John Edward, continued working together for about 10 years, and then they decided to go their own ways. I don't know if we really know the reason why. I think maybe they wanted to concentrate on different things, but I don't think it was a big bust up. They just parted company. The youngest brother, William Henry, here, he decided to keep working for John Edward. Samuel Goworth II went and built the Brown House, which is still there in Kendal. It's just over the other side of the river from where 27 Lowell Street is. While John Edward stayed at Lowell Street, and then he bought another mill just outside of Kendal. But the expansion was a bit quick, and they actually went bust. So John Edward's side of it went belly up, and Samuel Goworth continued in the Brown House. The youngest brother, this guy William Henry, along with his childhood friend Henry Hogarth, we'll come to him in a minute, Junior, went to work for Samuel when John Edward, when he went bust. So when Samuel Goworth II died in 1886, the company was left again in trust to Samuel Goworth III. It seemed to have been a sort of recurring theme that whenever this company had been inherited, it was always succeeded by someone that was just too young to sort of carry it on, and not in this instance. So a year later, in 1887, William Henry Goworth here and Henry Hogarth incorporated the company that we have today. Once John Edward, the older brother, died, William Henry inherited Lowther Street, and they just moved their business in there, and that was about 1893. And that's where it stayed until 1993, really. So it's in there quite a while. I mean, I think it's sort of picture of, that's Lowther Street here. That's more or less, without the Turk at the moment up there, that's more or less how it looks now. It's quite funny because when we look at how we operate now in the place we are now, and when you walk around inside there, I thought I had a walkthrough when it was empty quite recently, because it sat empty for 25 years until now, and we're doing something else with it just at the moment as a project. But when you look in there, and it's such the volumes are just so small of everything, and they used to have to winch tobacco from one level to another and carry it upstairs in little boxes and then steam on the top floor. And it's just, to me, it seems amazing. Even where we are now isn't particularly ideal, but it seems amazing to me how they used to work in such a confined space. And the ceilings are quite low downstairs, and it's quite the building, and it's an important part of Kendal's history now. William Henry, who set up in there with his buddy Hogarth, was succeeded by his son Samuel Henry. Quite confusing with all the similar names. Again, only 14 years old. Samuel Henry then had 4 kids with a lady called Emily Ruth Nelson. And the second son from her was Jeff Goworth, that was mine and Rachel's grandfather. It's a bit of a bad picture. That was Jeffrey there. Henry Hogarth also had two sons, Frank and Charles. By 1973, both Frank and Charles retired from the company, leaving my dad, who's in the middle there, John, as director, along with David Hogarth, which was one of the previous Hogarth sons, as directors. Then in 1978, Dad became MD, and then shortly after that, in 1980, the Hogarth side sold their shares from it. So, because a lot of people ask us, what's the Hogarth side, and where are they at? Well, since 1980, they've been sort of out the question. And I think I was 2 years old when that was taken, and that's actually in Germany with Poschels. This was a picture that Mum found, Mum's moving house, and she's been finding all sorts of pictures and stuff like this. So, yeah, quite nice I was having old pictures. Anyway, so Samuel Goworth, on the sort of other side of the family, I suppose, in one way, also expanded into a new factory while retaining the Brown House, which is with the picture on the left, which again that's still standing, looking pretty similar to it does there really. Just used for packing and stuff. But about 1929, they needed a bit of a cash injection. And so a new MD, who was also a relation, it was actually the grandson of Samuel Gowth II, Mr. Derek Dakini Cannon, basically became MD, presumably just bought into it and came into it that way. And they moved all the production back into the Brown House here, and they basically went to concentrate on snuff. That was what they were going to do. And then, I mean, and this next part is a bit sort of my opinion of what happened next, that through the sort of, Samuel Gowth didn't seem to quite have, in the more recent times, a clear path to inheritance, and sort of feel because of that, there was maybe a lack of investment and they sort of struggled to keep up a little bit. So in 2015, I received a call from Rob Young saying, you know, Samuel Gowth is, you know, wants to talk about, you know, being bought out and this sort of thing. So what they had that we didn't at Gowth Hoggarth is they actually had quite a big export book. And Gowth Hoggarth and my dad John were never really into the export market. You know, they'd almost muscled Samuel Gowth out of the UK market and dominated the UK market. And as we'll sort of talk about in what we're doing in the here and now section, the export side was clearly going to become something that's maybe going to, well, we know now is going to become really, really important in the future. So just sort of bringing up to date really, so that's sort of briefly, I suppose, where Rachel here has sort of come from. But really, sort of the past sort of 3 years, there's been, you know, a lot of changes in the company. So I think it seems to me that certainly within tobacco and probably a lot of other industries that, you know, each generation seems to have its typical bunch of challenges. So, you know, a couple of generations ago, it was, you know, world wars, mine closures, which in the snuff industry, mine closures was a big deal. It was a big loss for the industry there. You know, the last generation for us, for Dad's time, was sort of relocating out of that old factory into the new one. It's quite a big task, moving factories, and the entry to all that legislation that Lyndon talked about before, start looking at plain packaging, things like this. And my feeling is that this generation now, you know, the problems are sort of more geopolitical and just regulation on steroids. There's just so much going on the whole, you know, when you talk about where's leaf coming from, or who's starting a war somewhere, or you know, you're always looking over your shoulder, I think, in tobacco, aren't you? From a fairly standing start, from a Gowth Hoggarth point of view, you know, there's not been a lot of modernisation in the last 30 years, and part of that is really endearing to the products and what we do, but as we move down this sort of really crazy road of regulation, like super regulation, there has to be modern elements. The government don't accept these track and trace reports on scrappy bits of paper, for example, and they all have to be submitted in a certain time frame. So, you know, there is an element of modernisation, you know, required. But we're investing a huge amount of money in new systems and equipment. All these processes rely on new hardware, new software, and it doesn't come cheap. So I've put our track and trace implementation, I've stuck it at £100,000 a year, something like this. And it was about that. It was probably obviously a bit more than that to set it up. One of the problems we've got, because we're having to look outside the UK as well, is that a part of that WHO protocol that Wyndham talked about in his chat, most of you weren't here, but there's other countries in the world following this. So if we're going to export, we have to plug into those systems as well. So it's not just you guys in the UK that we're obviously sort of primarily having to look after our stock in terms of being compliant, but what happens if, Russia has a system, for example, so does, I think, Dubai has a system. Now, they're not all covering all tobacco products at the moment. They're still sort of, I think, fairly fragmented. But what if they say, well, we want to store your data, you've got to store your data in our country, that's going to be another $50,000. Everyone wants more money. I think part of this actually just currently hurts us at the moment is we are tied into a repository contract within the EU. For sales to the EU, we've not been able to ship anything there since last year, but it's still costing me €40,000 a year for cloud storage. So basically, it's getting more expensive, and there's a bit of a chase on our hands in terms of growing our. There'll be a point later on, but growing our sort of volumes and capacity so we have enough money to fund all these global systems. That's just my prediction. At the moment, we only pay sort of for the UK and the EU system, but it could happen. We could be looking at £1 million software bill every year. It's entirely possible, but we just have to see. I think, got to touch on the pandemic, obviously. This, as for, I think, virtually every business that I've spoken to and every interview and podcast and everything else, we've talked about this. It's sped up the implementation of these new systems. We've had quite a few of you guys, our customers, saying, we're looking to go online and have you got any images and this sort of thing. We've seen other companies become maybe a bit more modernised as well. And certainly the lesson learned from our point of view, and probably yours, is that a company needs to be flexible in how it works and reduce reliance on too many other companies who might not be open for a while or ever again. We'd actually just bought a colour label printer, an industrial one, about 2 weeks before the lockdown hit. If we hadn't bought that machine, and it was really just because we were going to do it anyway, we wouldn't have had any labelling, any package or anything, because Stramongate Press, who incidentally actually bought Kendall, the Brown House, because they're right opposite there, they just furloughed and went home. So we would have had just no packaging or anything. So I definitely think just being more reliant, and we're investing more and more in doing things ourselves. I'm always more keen to do things ourselves rather than rely on other people. It just gives you that flexibility as well. So compliance, the last thing on there, it's going to dominate all our worlds in this trade for the foreseeable future, really. From packaging regulations, as Wyndham's already mentioned, to track and trace, and all the funny nuanced laws that we've now got to work within. They can have serious implications on our supply to you. I've got a note here to explain about raw leaf transport, which I don't know if Wyndham's up to date with where we are, but for us to even get the leaf at the moment, the hurdles, depending on where it's coming from, are massive. The restrictions on what HMRC want to know. So in about 2017, I think, they brought in the raw leaf approval scheme. I don't know what it was before that. And so what happened in our situation was, so the first year that was applied for, our previous MD Rob had acquired this approval for 3 years. And then all of a sudden, only a couple of months ago, HMRC are saying, not quite knocking on the door, but phoning up saying, well, do you want to renew your thing because it's going to run out your license? And this is to hold raw leaf, to produce it, turn it into stuff. And we said, so what's this then? So it's a new thing last time, but you've got to renew it. And they wanted to know everything. Even 5 kilo samples of leaf that we might have sent from, anywhere in the world. They wanted to know where that 5 kilos was. They wanted to know what batch it was mixed into. They wanted to know the transporter who carried it. And the transporters also have to have one of these approvals. So put that into the context of where we are, in whatever month we are now, September, October 2021, with a trucking shortage that's now going to drive the fuel stations in the next couple of days. We've got to find, if we were going to bring some leaf, which we have some Perique sat in Germany at the moment, trying to find a transport that's actually going to bring that leaf here normally is pretty difficult because no one wants to touch anything tobacco-y, okay? if that European haulage company also has to have a license from HMRC, what are the chances of us getting that leaf? So we can buy and pay, tens of thousands of euros or dollars for some leaf, and it can sit there for 3 months before we can find anyone to pick it up. Or we maybe look to do it ourselves or whatever. So I think these are maybe some of the things that you don't really see when you're buying a finished product, but these are some of the challenges that we have, and we do find a way. But HMRC are there looking all the time at us, and it's only renewed another year. So year on year now they're wanting, so you're just having to be so squeaky clean and everything, which is what I spend a lot of my time doing, making sure we're doing.